It started as a drunken dare. Ethan, Marcus, and Lila were all college seniors, restless and bored one late October night. They had exhausted every bar and every party in town. That's when Marcus brought up the asylum. Graywood, he said, smirking as if he'd just revealed buried treasure. It's not far from here. Place has been abandoned since the 1960s. Rumor is, the doctors ran experiments so bad they had to shut the whole place down overnight. Lila rolled her eyes. That sounds like an urban legend. Ethan, who always played the skeptic, laughed. So what? We go, take a few pictures, prove it's just another dusty building. Easy clout. They piled into Ethan's rust-red SUV, headlights slicing through the misty backroads. By midnight, they stood before Graywood Asylum. The building loomed like a broken monument, its windows shattered, its roof sagging. Ivy strangled the walls. The wrought iron gate was chained shut, yet the chain hung loose, as though someone had opened it recently. Ladies first, Marcus joked, pushing the gate with a screech. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Even the crickets had gone mute. The first thing that hit them was the smell. Damp, moldy air that seemed to cling to their lungs. Their flashlights swept across peeling wallpaper, broken gurneys, and rusted wheelchairs. Graffiti scrawled across one wall read, "We never left." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "Creepy," Lila muttered. She pulled out her phone to record. "Okay, let's make this quick. A walkthrough, then we're gone." But Marcus was already ahead, pushing deeper down a hallway, lined with old patient rooms. Each door had a small window, covered in grime. Behind the glass, it almost looked like shadows shifted when their lights passed. "Did you see that?" Lila whispered. "Rats," Ethan said. Though he didn't believe it, the deeper they went, the colder it grew. At the end of the hall was a locked door with a rusted plaque, Ward C, restricted access. Marcus grinned. "That's where the good stuff will be." They found a stairwell and climbed upward. Paint peeled like dead skin from the walls. Their footsteps echoed too loudly, as though the building itself were amplifying the sound. On the second floor, they stumbled into what must have been the records room. Metal filing cabinets stood toppled, papers scattered like leaves. Lila knelt, brushing dust off a folder. "Patient 47B, she read. "Subject shows extreme paranoia. Claims the walls speak to him." She shivered. "This is real." Suddenly, Marcus laughed. "Oh my God, look at this." He held up a Polaroid, yellowed with age. It showed a row of patients strapped to beds. Their eyes had been scratched out with something sharp. The sound of wheels creaking made them freeze. Down the hall, a wheelchair rolled slowly into view. No one pushed it. It stopped, as if watching them. Lila gasped. "We're not alone." The wheelchair squeaked to a stop in the middle of the hallway. Marcus swallowed hard, forcing a laugh. "Okay, wind, right?" Draft through the halls, pushed it. But Ethan noticed the air was still. Not a whisper of breeze moved through the asylum. Lila's flashlight trembled in her hand. "I want to go back. Now." Before Ethan could agree, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Slow, dragging steps, like bare feet on tile. They spun around. Nothing. The hallway behind them was empty. Then the wheelchair rolled backwards on its own into the shadows. "Hell no," Lila whispered. Marcus, being the most stubborn of the group, insisted they press on. "Look, we came this far. If this place is haunted, we're getting it on camera." They found themselves back at the rusted door. Ward C, restricted access? To their surprise, it was no longer locked. The chain hung loosely, as if someone had just removed it. The door creaked open, revealing a long corridor lined with padded cells. The air here smelled coppery, metallic, like old blood. Inside one cell, a message was carved into the wall. They opened us up, but never closed us. Ethan's skin crawled. Okay, we've seen enough. A low moan echoed from the far end of the corridor. Marcus, being the most stubborn of the group, insisted they press on. Look, we came this far. If this place is haunted, we're getting it on camera. They found themselves back at the rusted door. Ward C, restricted access? To their surprise, it was no longer locked. The chain hung loosely, as if someone had just removed it. The door creaked open, revealing a long corridor lined with padded cells. The air here smelled coppery, metallic, like old blood. Inside one cell, a message was carved into the wall. They opened us up, but never closed us. Ethan's skin crawled. Okay, we've seen enough. Low moan echoed from the far end of the corridor. They followed the sound, despite every instinct telling them to run. At the end of the corridor was a large room with gurneys lined up in neat rows. Restraints dangled from the sides. Rusted surgical tools lay scattered on trays. Lila lifted her camera. The night vision showed movement that their eyes couldn't see. Dozens of pale shapes shifting in the corners of the room. When she lowered the camera, the room looked empty. Ethan's breath caught. We need to leave. Now. But Marcus stood frozen, staring at one of the gurneys. A figure lay strapped down, its chest rising and falling. It turned its head toward them. The figure opened its mouth, and a piercing scream filled the room, so loud it rattled the broken light fixtures above. The other gurneys began to stir. Restraints creaked. Shapes shifted. They're still here, Lila whispered, tears streaming down her face. The trio bolted, sprinting down the hall, past the cells, past the carved messages. The moans and screams followed, echoing from every direction. When they reached the stairwell, Ethan realized something terrifying. The stairs didn't lead down anymore. They twisted upward endlessly, spiraling into blackness. The stairwell stretched impossibly upward. The trio climbed anyway, footsteps frantic. But no matter how far they ran, the bottom floor never reappeared. Lila panted, gripping the railing. This isn't real. It can't be real. Marcus shouted into the darkness. Hey, whoever's doing this, it's not funny. The air grew heavier the higher they went. Each breath burned, as though the building itself wanted to choke them. Then the lights flickered. For a split second, the walls weren't concrete. They were flesh. Veins pulsed beneath the surface. Ethan stumbled back, gagging. The building is alive. Somehow, they burst through a door and landed in another hallway. At the end of it was an office, untouched by decay. Papers covered the desk, organized neatly. Ethan picked one up, a patient file. Name, Marcus Hale. Date, admitted October 12th, 2023. Condition, paranoia, delusions of grandeur. Subject does not believe he is a patient. Marcus froze. That's me. Lila grabbed another. Name, Lila Carter. Condition, severe anxiety. Believes she is exploring the hospital with friends. Subject unaware of her true confinement. Her hands shook violently. No, this is wrong. This isn't us. Ethan flipped open the final file, already knowing what it would say. Name, Ethan Cross. Condition, denial. Refuses to accept status as patient. Believes he is merely visiting the asylum. Prognosis, terminal. The pages dripped with fresh ink, as if written that very moment. A voice echoed behind them. Calm, cold. You shouldn't be out of your rooms. They spun around. A tall figure stood in the doorway, dressed in a decayed lab coat. His face was obscured by a surgical mask, yellowed with age. His eyes gleamed faintly in the darkness. I've been waiting for you to return to treatment, he said softly. You never should have left. He raised a scalpel, its blade reflecting the dim light. The walls groaned, closing in around them. Doors slammed shut, one by one. The asylum didn't want them to leave. They ran, weaving through corridors that shifted and looped. Every turn brought them back to the same door. Ward C inside. The doctor's voice followed them, patient and unhurried. You're sick, but I can help. That's what this place is for. You belong here, Lila screamed, clutching her head. Stop, stop saying that. The whispers of unseen patients joined in, chanting in unison. We never left. We never left. We never left. Marcus's eyes glazed. He dropped to his knees. Maybe we are supposed to be here. Ethan grabbed him by the shoulders, shaking him violently. No, this place is lying to us. But deep down, a terrible thought gnawed at him. What if the asylum was telling the truth? The figure in the lab coat stepped closer, scalpel glinting faintly in the dark. His voice was calm, reassuring, like a lullaby laced with poison. You came back because you always come back, he said. Patients never leave Graywood. They only forget until it's time for treatment again. The air thickened, pressing against their lungs. Lila clutched Ethan's arm, trembling. Marcus stared blankly, as though hypnotized. The doctor tilted his head. One of you is ready. The others will follow. His gaze fixed on Marcus. Marcus staggered forward, tears streaming down his face. Maybe he's right. Maybe. I don't remember everything. What if we've been here before? Ethan blocked him. No, that's what this thing wants you to believe. The doctor raised the scalpel and pressed it into Marcus's palm, curling his fingers around it. Treatment begins with acceptance, the doctor whispered. Once you understand you belong here, it won't hurt anymore. Marcus screamed and dropped the blade. His hand bled freely, the sound echoing like 1,000 voices crying out at once. The asylum shook. The walls convulsed, stretching and splitting. Flesh-like surfaces tore open, revealing pulsating corridors of muscle and bone. The asylum was no longer pretending. It showed its true form. Dozens of figures crawled from the walls, patients with hollow eyes, bound in restraints, their mouths sewn shut. They reached for the trio, grasping, desperate. We need to run, Lila screamed. But every hallway looped back to the doctor. He waited patiently, as though there was no rush. You'll tire yourselves out, he murmured. Then you'll accept your treatment. Everyone does. Ethan noticed something. The files still clutched in his hand. Patient records. His record. As he stared, the words began to change. Subject Ethan Cross. Condition. Resistance weakening. Prognosis. Inevitable compliance. He realized the asylum wasn't recording them. It was rewriting them. Every moment they stayed. Every second they doubted. Their history reshaped itself. That's why no one ever escaped. The building didn't just trap bodies. It rewrote souls. The doctor lifted his scalpel once more. It's time. The patients closed in, whispering in unison, "We never left." "Neither will you." The walls pulsed. The ground split. The trio clung to each other, screams swallowed by the asylum itself. And then, silence. Weeks later, another group of explorers ventured into Graywood. They found the asylum eerily still, papers scattered across a desk. Among them, 3 fresh files. Ethan Cross, admitted 2023. Condition, delusional belief of escape. Lila Carter, admitted 2023. Condition, persistent denial, extreme fear response. Marcus Hale, admitted 2023. Condition, obsession with freedom, ultimately compliant. The explorers laughed nervously, thinking it was some old prank. But when they left, one of them swore the sound of a wheelchair squeaking followed them all the way to the gate, and deep inside, the doctor prepared for his next patients. The road to Hollow Creek was long and winding, lined with skeletal trees that clawed at the fog. Claire's car headlights cut through the mist, illuminating cracked signs that pointed toward the nearly forgotten village. She had never heard of the place until last week, when an anonymous letter arrived in her mailbox. It read, "If you want answers about your family, come to Hollow Creek, but do not speak once you arrive." At first she thought it was a cruel prank, but the letter contained one detail no one else could know: her mother's maiden name. That was enough to make her drive. The village appeared suddenly, swallowed by fog. Small cottages sagged under decades of neglect, their windows black, doors hanging crooked. The cobblestone streets were deserted, though she could feel eyes watching her from the shadows. What unsettled her most was the silence, not just the absence of people, but no wind, no insects, no animals. It was a suffocating quiet, as though the village itself held its breath. A figure appeared at the end of the street, an old woman in a tattered shawl. She raised a finger to her lips. "Do not speak." Claire entered the inn at the village square. A ledger lay open on the counter, filled with names scrawled in a trembling handwriting. Every name was crossed out, except for one blank line at the bottom. The innkeeper, a gaunt man with hollow cheeks, handed her a pen. He pointed to the blank line. Claire hesitated, then wrote her name. The man nodded and slid her a key. No words, no sounds. As she climbed the stairs, she heard faint scratching. On the wall, written in charcoal, were the rules: do not speak, do not sing, do not scream. Claire's room was cold, the bed stiff, the air stale. She tried to sleep, but the silence pressed against her ears like a weight. Around midnight, she heard footsteps outside her door, slow, deliberate. Then, a knock. She froze, clutching the sheets. The knock came again, 3 times, steady. When she dared to peek through the crack under the door, she saw nothing, but faintly, on the wall across the hall, new words had appeared in charcoal. "Do not answer." The next morning, she walked the streets. The villagers moved quietly, avoiding eye contact. Children played without laughter, their mouths open in silent giggles. She noticed something strange. None of them had tongues. Scar tissue stretched across their mouths, as though their silence had been forced. One villager, a young man with haunted eyes, slipped her a piece of parchment. It read, "Leave before the 3rd night, or you will join us." Claire sat in her room that evening, staring at the note the villager had given her. "Leave before the 3rd night." The words gnawed at her. What would happen on the 3rd night? Why was she warned? As she lay in bed, she finally drifted into uneasy sleep. A sound woke her. At first, she thought it was wind, but Hollow Creek had no wind. Then she realized it was a whisper, soft, desperate, threading through the cracks in the walls. Her name, Claire. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, fighting the urge to answer. The whisper grew louder, urgent, pleading. She pressed her hands over her ears. Then, in the silence, came scratching. Words etched themselves on the plaster right above her bed. Speak, and they will hear you. The next morning, Claire wandered the village square. At its center stood an ancient stone well, covered in moss. Villagers avoided it, walking in wide arcs around it, never glancing at it. But Claire felt drawn to it. Peering over the edge, she saw nothing but blackness. Yet, deep within, she thought she saw shapes moving, like pale hands, clawing upward. Someone tugged her sleeve. The old woman in the shawl. She shook her head, violently, pressing a finger to her lips. Then she scribbled something on a scrap of paper. The well listens. Do not stand too close. That afternoon, Claire explored further. On the edge of the village stood a crumbling mansion, its windows boarded, its gates chained. Unlike the rest of Hollow Creek, this place reeked of abandonment. She slipped inside. The air was suffocating, heavy with mold and dust. Faded portraits hung on the walls. Men and women with hollowed eyes, their mouths crudely painted over in black. She stopped when she saw the last portrait. It was her mother. The same shawl, the same eyes. The only difference, her mouth was sewn shut. That night, Claire couldn't bear the silence any longer. She whispered into the dark, "Mom." The air changed instantly. The temperature dropped. The floorboards groaned as though something enormous pressed against them. The walls trembled, and every candle in the inn extinguished at once. From the black well outside came a roar of countless voices, layered and broken, as though thousands spoke at once. The villagers fell to their knees in the square, covering their mouths. The rules had been broken. The silent ones came. Pale figures emerged from the mist, faceless, their bodies gaunt, their hands twisted into claws. They moved like smoke, their heads twitching in sharp, unnatural jerks. They circled the inn, whispering in voices not their own, some childlike, some guttural, some eerily familiar. Claire pressed herself against the wall, trembling. She could hear her mother's voice among them, repeating the same word, "Stay." The next morning, Claire found her door ajar. A leather-bound journal lay on the floor, as though someone had slid it inside overnight. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was frantic, written in jagged strokes. "The silence is not ours. It belongs to them. They listen through our voices. Every word feeds them. Every sound draws them closer. That is why we gave up our tongues. It was the only way to survive." Claire turned the page. The well is their mouth, the village, their body. We are already inside them. Her stomach twisted. Was Hollow Creek itself alive? That night, she awoke to a burning pain in her throat. When she looked in the mirror, a dark symbol had appeared just under her jaw. 3 vertical lines, like claw marks. She scrubbed at it furiously, but the mark would not fade. The skin pulsed faintly, as though ink flowed beneath it. Someone tapped on her window. The young man who had warned her before stood outside, his face pale with terror. He held up a note. "They have chosen you. Run before the 3rd night." The next day, Claire followed a group of villagers as they moved silently toward the church at the edge of town. Inside, she found rows of pews filled with villagers, their heads bowed. At the altar stood the old woman in the shawl, her hands clasped. She didn't speak. Instead, she opened her mouth wide, revealing nothing but smooth scar tissue where her tongue had once been. One by one, villagers approached her, and with knives of bone, they cut the tongues of newcomers, offered willingly, without sound, without struggle. When they turned toward Claire, she ran. The silent ones chased her through the fog. Their whispers clawed at her mind, promising peace if she surrendered. She stumbled into the forbidden mansion again, slamming the doors behind her. The portraits seemed to watch her now, their blackened mouths shifting slightly. She heard her mother's voice behind her. Claire. She turned. At the top of the staircase stood her mother, pale, hollow-eyed, mouth sewn shut. Yet Claire could still hear her words, not with her ears, but inside her head. Stay, child. If you leave, they will follow. If you join, you will live forever. Claire backed away, trembling. No, this isn't real. Her mother's sewn lips curved into something like a smile. Suddenly, the young man burst through the door, grabbing her arm. His chest heaved as he shoved another note into her hand. Do not believe her. She is part of them now. You still have time. The silent one's whispers swelled outside, circling the mansion. The walls shook, dust falling from the ceiling. Claire looked between the man and the apparition of her mother. One offered escape, the other offered eternity. Claire's legs trembled. Her mother's figure at the staircase radiated sorrow, her sewn lips quivering as though she struggled against invisible stitches. Stay, child. Join us. It won't hurt if you don't resist. The young man gripped Claire's wrist tighter, his hand shaking. He scribbled furiously on a fresh scrap of paper. If you listen, they own you. If you run, you still have a chance. The silent ones outside pressed their faces against the mansion windows, fogging the glass with whispers that sounded like Claire's own voice echoing back at her. They fled through the back hallways of the mansion. Claire felt the mark on her throat burning hotter, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers. By dawn, the village square was eerily still. The well sat at its center, its stones slick with condensation. The old woman stood beside it, staring at Claire with eyes that seemed almost pitying. She lifted her hands, showing scars where her tongue once was, and then pointed down into the well. Claire peered in. For a moment, she thought she saw her reflection. Then, the reflection smiled on its own. The young man led her into an abandoned schoolhouse at the edge of Hollow Creek. Inside, he revealed a hidden stash of journals and letters. One of them contained the origin of the curse. Centuries ago, the villagers made a pact with something that lived beneath the earth. During a famine, they prayed for survival. The thing answered, granting them food, shelter, and safety. But in return, it demanded silence. Their voices fed it, their words nourished it. The well was its mouth. Claire wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to leave. But as the sun began to set, she realized something horrifying. The fog had thickened into a wall around the village. Every path out led back in. The villagers gathered in the square, kneeling before the well. Silent prayers passed between them, communicated not with words, but with thought. And the mark on Claire's throat seared hotter, like molten iron branding her from within. She collapsed, choking, as voices not her own echoed in her skull. At midnight, the well groaned. The stone shifted, cracking, splitting. From the black pit below, countless pale hands clawed upward, grasping the rim. The silent ones poured forth, spilling across the square like smoke with teeth. They circled Claire, their eyeless faces fixed on her. The old woman stepped forward, holding a bone knife. She raised it toward Claire's throat. No one spoke, no one screamed. But inside Claire's mind, one word thundered, louder than anything she had ever heard. Now. The old woman's bone knife gleamed in the moonlight. Her hands didn't tremble. She moved toward Claire with the slow inevitability of someone carrying out a sacred duty. The villagers watched, heads bowed. The silent ones pressed in, their whispers slithering through Claire's mind. Give it up. Give it away. Join us. The young man suddenly lunged forward, grabbing the knife. The blade slashed across his palm, spraying blood across the stones. He shoved the weapon into Claire's hands. His eyes burned with desperation. End it, he mouthed silently. Claire staggered to the edge of the well. The surface shimmered like black glass. Her reflection stared back, but it wasn't hers anymore. The thing in the well had her face, but its sewn mouth split open in a smile far too wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. It whispered, not through sound, but inside her skull. Cut the tongue, feed me, or I'll take more than your voice. The knife pulsed hot in her hand, as though urging her to obey. The young man gripped her shoulder, shaking his head violently. His blood dripped onto the stones, splattering into the well. The silent ones recoiled. For the first time, Claire saw fear in their hollow faces. She realized they weren't loyal servants. They were prisoners, forever bound by their silence. The well roared, the ground splitting beneath it. Hands clawed higher, pulling something vast and skeletal into view. Claire raised the knife. With a scream that tore her throat raw, Claire did the one thing the village forbade. She spoke. Enough! The sound shattered the silence like glass. The villagers collapsed, clutching their scarred mouths. The silent ones shrieked, their bodies unraveling into mist. The well convulsed, the reflection twisting into fury. Hands clawed desperately at the stones, but without silence to feed on, the thing could not hold its form. Claire drove the knife into the mark on her throat. Blinding light erupted. When Claire opened her eyes, Hollow Creek was gone. The cottages, the villagers, the well, vanished. She stood in the middle of an empty field, dawn breaking over the horizon. Her throat burned. Touching it, she found the mark had vanished, but when she opened her mouth to speak, no sound came out. Her voice was gone. On the wind, faint as a sigh, came a whisper. You broke the silence. Now you carry it. Claire staggered toward the road, clutching the journal. She had escaped Hollow Creek, but she knew the silence would follow her, and somewhere, in places where voices dared not rise, the well still listened. Alex slumped into his seat on the 11:45 p.m. bus. He was exhausted after a late shift at the convenience store and was looking forward to a quiet ride home. The bus smelled faintly of gasoline and mildew. Its windows were fogged with condensation, muting the city lights outside. The driver nodded at him silently. No greeting, no smile. Alex took a deep breath and glanced around. There were only a few passengers: an elderly man with a cane, a young woman scribbling in a notebook, and a teenager with a hoodie pulled low over his face. Nothing seemed unusual until the bus left the familiar streets of the city and entered roads Alex had never seen before. The scenery became unsettling. Streetlights flickered in unnatural patterns. Trees grew in impossible angles. their branches reaching toward the bus like grasping hands. Alex tapped the driver on the shoulder. "Excuse me, where are we?" The driver didn't respond. Not a word, not a glance. The other passengers seemed unaffected, staring blankly at their laps or out the window. Alex felt a chill creep down his spine. The city he knew had disappeared. In its place was a road that seemed to stretch infinitely into darkness. The bus jolted. Alex stumbled. When he looked again, the teenager in the hoodie had vanished. No one else seemed to notice. Did he just get off? Alex asked the young woman. She didn't look at him. She didn't answer. Panic began to rise in Alex's chest. He scanned the bus. Every seat appeared the same. Every passenger looked pale, their faces drawn and blank. Then he noticed something terrifying. The elderly man with the cane had no feet. His legs ended abruptly, as if floating above the floor. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to distort. The bus didn't stop. Streetlights blurred, trees bent, and shadows moved in ways that defied physics. Alex approached the driver. "Please, stop the bus. I want to get off." The driver shook his head slowly. Still, no words. From the back, the young woman whispered, not aloud, but in Alex's mind, "They never leave, and neither will you." Alex stumbled back to his seat. His heart pounded as he realized the bus had no destination, only this infinite stretch of road. Alex leaned against the cold glass, looking outside, but he didn't see the fogged landscape. Instead, he saw faces, hundreds of faces pressed against the glass from the darkness, hollow eyes screaming silently. He blinked. The faces vanished. His own reflection stared back, pale, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, but when he tried to scream, no sound came out. Something cold brushed his shoulder. He turned. No one was there. A voice, soft and terrible, filled Alex's mind. "Do not speak. Do not leave your seat. Do not look behind you." The other passengers shifted, synchronized, unnerving in their stillness. Alex tried to ignore it, telling himself it was exhaustion, but the shadows outside the windows writhed, growing closer, shaping into hands and mouths that wanted to swallow the bus whole. The road curved impossibly. The bus seemed to stretch and contract like a living thing. Alex sank lower into his seat, trying to avoid drawing attention. But the seats themselves began to whisper, not in words, but in thoughts. A chorus of voices pressed directly into his mind. "Stay, never leave. You belong to us." He clutched his head. "No, this isn't real. None of this is real." A cold hand grabbed his wrist. He yanked it away. There was no one there. The bus rattled violently, shaking him in his seat. Outside, the road twisted like a snake. Impossible angles folding into one another. The young woman, scribbling in her notebook, slowly lifted her head. Her face had changed. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale as ash. Alex froze. She whispered, again, only in his mind, "You'll join us soon." The elderly man with the cane floated slightly above the floor, his lower limbs gone completely. He reached a skeletal hand toward Alex, and he could see tiny figures writhing inside, faces screaming silently. The other passengers began to shift unnaturally, limbs stretched, faces contorted. They weren't human. Alex stood, stumbling toward the driver. "Please, stop this bus, please." The driver's hands tightened on the wheel. His face tilted slightly, revealing hollow sockets where eyes should have been. A faint grin formed under the shadow of his hat. The bus accelerated, faster and faster. The scenery outside dissolved into a void. Alex realized the driver wasn't driving. They were flying, suspended in some impossible realm between reality and nightmare. Looking out the window, Alex saw nothing but blackness. Shapes moved in the void, vast and clawed, stretching toward the bus. The streetlights were swallowed by shadows. He tried to scream. No sound. A whisper came from behind him, though no one was there. The end is just the beginning. You cannot leave. The bus itself began to twist, bending like a living spine. Seats elongated, passengers contorted, hands reaching through aisles, scraping Alex's arms and face. Alex lunged for the emergency exit. He pulled the lever. Nothing. The door melted into the frame, the metal turning like liquid. He turned to run back to his seat, but the aisle stretched impossibly long. The driver's face appeared at the rear, grinning, though he hadn't moved an inch. There is no exit. There is only the ride. Alex collapsed to the floor, clutching his head as the passengers' forms crawled over him, their whispers merging into a single voice. Join us. You belong here. Suddenly, the bus walls vanished. Alex found himself in a hall of infinite mirrors. Each reflection showed him older, paler, his mouth sewn shut, eyes hollow. He screamed inside, trying to break the mirrors, but the shards reflected more versions of himself. Dozens, hundreds, already trapped. A new voice whispered, "You are already part of us. You just don't know it yet." Alex backed into a corner, realizing the bus wasn't a vehicle, it was a gateway, and every passenger was a soul caught in transit. Alex stumbled through the hall of mirrors, panic clawing at his chest. Each reflection moved independently, mocking him, whispering, "You should have stayed asleep. You should have never boarded." He noticed the other passengers, some already frozen in the reflections, swaying as if caught between life and death. The young woman, who had whispered in his mind now, floated beside him, her face twisted into a grin of teeth, too sharp to be human. "We were all like you once," she whispered. "Now, we belong here." Alex backed away, desperately searching for a door, a window, anything. The bus driver appeared behind him in a sudden flash. His eyes, once hollow sockets, now glowed red. "You cannot leave," he said, not aloud, but in Alex's mind. The mirrors began to shatter simultaneously, fragments swirling around him. Each shard revealed another corridor of the bus, each filled with more passengers, silent, faceless, hands reaching out. Alex realized the bus wasn't just endless, it was alive. It fed on passengers, trapping them in layers of reality. A voice, faint but familiar, broke through the chaos. "Alex, you can still leave. You have to choose." He looked and saw the young man in the hoodie, seated in one of the reflections. His eyes were desperate, urging Alex to act. The mirrors around him warped, forming two pathways, forward, deeper into the bus, and into eternity. Back, toward the edge of the hall, a faint glimmer of outside reality. Alex knew the first path meant joining the passengers forever. The second could be his escape, but only if he risked confronting the driver. Alex sprinted toward the exit of the hall. The mirrors screamed in protest, voices layered and overlapping. "Stay. Belong. Join us." The driver stepped into his path, blocking the way. The red glow from his eyes intensified. Alex raised his hands, screaming, not a sound, but in his mind, every ounce of defiance. The bus shuddered violently. The driver's face twisted with fury. and the passengers outside the mirrors lunged, but Alex pressed forward anyway. A flash of light erupted from the front of the bus. The mirrors cracked into shards that spiraled around Alex like a tornado. The young man in the hoodie appeared beside him, holding a faded ticket stub. Focus. It's just a ride. It's not reality. Alex grabbed the stub and ran toward a shard of the front windshield, now broken, revealing night sky. He leapt through. Alex landed hard on the pavement of a familiar city street. The bus was gone. The fog had lifted. Streetlights glimmered normally. He gasped for air, realizing his voice returned. He screamed, truly screamed, and his lungs filled with sound for the first time in hours or days. Looking back, there was no sign of the night bus, the passengers, or the hall of mirrors. Days later, Alex found a note tucked under his door. The ride isn't over. Others will come. Remember the faces. Remember the silence. Next time, you may not wake. He realized he had escaped, but the bus was still out there, waiting for the next unwary passenger to step aboard. Alex never took a night bus again. He warned friends, strangers, anyone he could, but most dismissed it as a drunken tale. Sometimes, in his dreams, he saw the windows of the bus open, pale faces pressed against the glass, whispering his name, reminding him that the ride never really ends, and somewhere, in a dimension just beyond reality, the driver waits. Next stop, eternity.